Hello and welcome to the Music is My Life podcast from Berklee Online. I'm your host, Pat Healy, and take note that at the end of this episode, you will have an opportunity to take a Berklee Online course for $100 off the original price. Stay tuned for the credits at the end of this episode, or look for the details in the meta description of this episode. But let's get to the show. Our guest today is Spyder Stacy, tin whistle player for the Pogues, a band he started in the early 1980s. They quickly rose to prominence for combining punk rock sensibilities with acoustic Irish revel songs and the poetry of singer Shane MacGowan, who the band ended up firing at the height of their fame, as MacGowan was at the height of his notoriety for his excessive behavior. The band reunited at the turn of the century, and Spyder Stacy is currently working on a Pogues musical, as well as touring with original Pogues bassist Cait O'Riordan under the moniker of Poguetry with Lost Bayou Ramblers from New Orleans, a place that Spyder now calls home. But it all started with him as a lad in England with the Beatles, and in true punk rock fashion, he's not exactly proud of that.
This is kind of blow my credibility in one fell swoop. But the first record that I actually remember was "She Loves You" by the Beatles. That's my earliest kind of musical memory, and it would have been on a radio at my mum's house in Eastbourne, which is in Sussex on the south coast of England. I've got to say that I'm not a huge Beatles fan, and I wasn't gonna, I wish I could come up with something slightly more left field possibly than that. But there you go. That's what it was.
Yeah, no, that doesn't blow your cover then.
Okay, that's good.
So when did you realize that you could have a part in playing music?
I'd always found the idea attractive. I think when punk happened, and I sort of realized then that, well, anyone can actually do this if they have a mind. If you have the confidence to just get up and try, then you can see how far you can get.
Was there music in your house growing up aside from the Beatles there?
When my sister was about 18 and she her and her husband moved to Holland and then Afghanistan, she gave me, actually I think they went to Boston first. They gave me all their records that they'd had in London, and they were like kind of counterculture hippie type people. I got all from when I was 11. I had this really, really cool record collection that I didn't have to do anything to acquire. It was just kind of like handed to me. Prior to that, in the house, not so much really. Neither my mum or dad were particularly. It wasn't they didn't like music. It just wasn't a sort of a big thing, I think, in either of their lives. It came more so probably later on.
Now, did you have any musical education, or was it just self-taught? None whatsoever.
None at all.
Nothing in school.
No.
Wow.
No.
It's so interesting because I just spoke to a group from New Orleans called Soul Rebels, and they're terrific. But we were talking, and they were just talking about how music education in the public schools was such a huge thing. And
it's a massive thing in New Orleans. It really, really is. And it's one of the worst things they do in New Orleans is when they start cutting. When they start cutting funding for music in schools. It's such a crucial part of the city's identity.
When did you first discover it?
The first time I went was would have been 1988 with the Pogues, and then we went again the following year, or was it maybe the year after? We went a couple of times with the Pogues in the early days. It was wild back then. I mean, deranged, one might say. And then but I didn't go back until the Pogues played Voodoo Fest in 2009, and my wife Louise went for the first time then, and we went back the following March. It was for the premiere of Treme. David Simon, who we know, had sort of invited us down for that, and Louise had been looking at houses in the meantime, and because I don't know, something about the city just really got to her, and we bought a house in Treme.
Wow. Then came the series.
Well, then I got a part in the series, yeah.
That's terrific.
Well, I mean, I say I got a part in the series. That's really probably over-egging the pudding slightly. I was in it. Yeah, I've got a couple of scenes.
Yeah, your character has a name. That's something.
He has,
it's a name that's
Slim
different.
Jim.
It's not as himself, so that's something.
That's right. Yeah. When we moved to New Orleans, there the area that we moved into was a real sort of proper New Orleans neighborhood. It wasn't anywhere that had been gentrified or anything like that. It was really, I mean, it had been kind of repopulated up post Katrina, but not really so much. not like you'd notice almost. I don't want to sound flip about it or anything like that at all, but it was. You really sort of saw. I mean, there was a lot of kids on our block. It was a real family block. Me and Louise moved in. We had some, like musical instruments with us, guitars and things, a couple of drums, whistles, and the kids on the block were just kind of like on us in a flash, like, oh yeah, let's have a go on the guitar, and it's like coming and making this like racket, But there was with regard to the drums, there was a couple of kids who were like they really know what they're doing, and you hear it as well, when you're walking around. And walking around New Orleans generally, particularly in the sort of like the more in the more black neighborhoods, which is most of the city really, you just hear music all the time coming from the schools and stuff. It's particularly at the right time of year, it's when they start gearing up for the parades and everything, and they sort of start gearing up pretty early on because everybody's wants to make sure they're really sort of sharp and everything. And yeah, it's brilliant. It's not. We don't have anything like that. We didn't have anything like that at my school, anything remotely like that.
So when like, let's get a year then. Where are we? Are we like mid 70s, late 70s at this point?
75 was when I left school.
Yeah, and at this point, punk hadn't really was it really taking?
No, punk didn't really happen until the following summer.
Right.
And that was just like that was in London and a few sort of like places like Manchester and a couple of other places as well, but New York obviously, but I'm talking about the UK at the moment. 76 it really started kicking off. But there was the sort of pub rock scene was already well underway in 75. So there were people like Dr. Feelgood. Eddie and the Hot Rods were kind of proto-punk. They came along sort of towards the end of 75, if my memory serves me right. There was stuff beginning to open up.
Mm-hmm. And so you're on the south coast of England at this point. What town?
No. We lived in that's just the town I was born in. We left there when I was 2. We moved to Guyana in South America for about a year. Then we came back, lived in Eastbourne again for a bit. My dad went and worked in Libya. He was working for Bechtel, who were I think George Schultz's company. He was I think he was basically a wages clerk out in the desert on the oil rigs. Yeah, so we moved to Tripoli and we were in Tripoli for 2.5 years and then back to Eastbourne again for a bit, and then I moved to London when I was 8, and so 75 I was in London.
Oh, okay. So you were there when it kind of exploded that summer then?
In 76, yeah.
Did you get to see the first Pistols gigs or anything like that?
No, I always managed to miss them somehow.
Yeah.
I was always like about a month behind, you know what I mean? And things were moving so quickly at that time that if you were a month late, you almost might as well not have been there at all.
Right. So you're in London, 76, and when in that timeline did Millwall Chainsaws start?
Around the beginning of 77, about January, February 77.
And how'd you find the people to play with? And
they were just we were just friends, and it was like, I think like a lot of bands it was more of an idea than an actual band, and I think in many ways it always was more of an idea than an actual band, even though we did sort of we did actually do gigs and have rehearsals and stuff and had songs.
Right. So with that band, you were singing with Millwall Chainsaws, right?
I was, yeah.
When was the first time then that you picked up an instrument?
Oh, that would have been much later when I was already in the Pogues. The original idea was that Shane and I would be sharing lead vocals. But my problem with singing at that time was I didn't really quite know how to do it. I used to get very I used to just tighten up. And the thing with singing is you've just got to relax. I think, a lot more people can sing than actually realize, but it's so much to do with having the confidence to just being able to open your mouth, open your lungs, and I sort of fell down there, but Shane just said, you should try the whistle, and I just thought, how hard can that be?
Did you take any lessons there, or just
No, I had one of those play in a day books. I taught myself Silent Night because I knew the tune to Silent Night and had little diagrams of which holes to cover.
Yeah.
And I just sort of took it from there.
That's great.
It's very easy to pick out a simple tune on the tin whistle. And it's if you can get a sound, it's not a hard instrument to get a sound on at all. If you just like breathe properly and listen to what you're doing, and then really again, it's just like it's up to you how good you want to get. I had I do sort of wish that I'd had the advantage, maybe sometimes anyway, at least, of having been born. I mean, you hear Irish tin whistle players, people who sort of play if you like classical Irish tin whistle players. It's always the first instrument they pick up, and they picked it up when they were like 5 or 6 years old, and they have the repertoire literally at their fingertips, and they have that particular style of playing, which is something that I never learned. That's something that I think you have to be taught, and you have to sort of grow up hearing as well.
Now, playing with the Pogues tin whistle, and it does seem like, correct me if I'm wrong, the Pogues started more as an idea before you kind of knew what you wanted to do before you...
No, not at
all.
Not at
okay,
all.
I was wrong.
No, we had it sort of came about almost by accident. In the Ollie Watts, who was the drummer in the Millwall Chainsaws, and Shane were in this club in London, a club called Cabaret Futura, and they approached there was this guy Richard Strange who ran the club, and Ollie and Shane approached him, and Ollie basically said, look, we've got this band, we do Irish rebel songs, and we'd like to play here. And so they got a gig. They didn't actually have a band as such. They just said we'd had this idea that we'd get this band together and record some Irish, well, not record, but rehearse some Irish rebel songs. And then they went and sort of got a gig, and then so we had to put it all together. But that makes it sound harder than it was, because it was basically the Millwall Chainsaws and Shane and this guy. Oh yeah, and this other friend of ours, this guy John Golding. So it's Ollie Watts, the guy called Matt Jacobson on bass. John must have been playing guitar. John and Shane must have been playing guitar, and I was singing. I don't know why Shane wasn't singing, but I was. And we did this. We learnt this set of Irish rebel songs and played them at this club. And then Jem Finer was at that gig, and he sort of saw a future in this. And I think Shane had already sort of had the idea that he could do something involving Irish music, involving, in the sort of vein of the Dubliners, but marrying it to that sort of whole sort of punk, I don't know, velocity and just in your faces.
It's funny, till you said that about the Irish rebel songs, I never really thought about what a screw you that is to England to play Irish rebel songs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Remembering also that of the people in that original, we called ourselves the New Republicans just because we were playing a new romantic club, and we thought it was smart. But bear in mind also that of the people on that stage, only Shane was Irish. All the rest of the band were English, right. 100%. So it's like a real. It's just like, yeah, well, fuck you, you imperialist bunch of shits. We don't want any part of this.
Was there any backlash?
There were a bunch of off-duty soldiers. Well, they would hardly have been on duty in the audience who were pelting us with French fries. But that was
How about your family? What your own family's background is English, so was there any sort of, what are you doing? What are you doing there?
No, well, I mean, it wasn't. I don't think they were even aware that I'd done that. Not that I would have had any problem with them saying it, but they wouldn't have. It wouldn't have been something that bothered them particularly.
So you met Shane in this club. Did I read somewhere there was a Ramones gig?
I met Shane at a Ramones show, at a place called the Roundhouse in London.
So at that point you were definitely plugged into what was going on in punk. You're not a month late there.
No, I'm not a month late there. I was
you were on top of it. You caught the wave.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, it was that was like a sort of major headlining gig in London. The place to have been would have been Dingwalls the previous June, where they were when they opened for the Flaming Groovies. But I missed that one, though I was actually aware of that one, but I somehow just didn't go. No excuse either, because it's like 2 stops away on the tube line.
So, and you didn't even really listen to Irish music growing up, did you?
Not sort of intently and avidly, but it wasn't something that I was entirely unaware of. I grew up near a lot of London was very Irish in those days, and there's a couple of like Kilburn which is was a big Irish neighbourhood and still is, was very close to where I lived, and was where we used to all get by our Dr. Martens from a shop called Direct Shoe Supply, which is on Kilburn High Road. So we'd go down there a lot. We were sort of too young to drink, but we would sort of nevertheless go into pubs and get served, and there would always be, there was always Irish music on the jukeboxes. There was a lot of, like I say, a lot of Irish people around. So the chances were that if you went into any pub, really, not even in a necessarily a particularly Irish part of town, there's a good chance that the pub would be run by Irish people. You know what I mean? It was around. The Dubliners had a couple of hits in the charts as well. They were quite, and plus there'd been the big, of course, another thing was there'd been the big folk boom in the 60s, but also all those people like Fairport Convention and everything. So a lot of my friends, like older brothers and sisters and stuff, had kind of got into people like Planksty and those sort of bands through their interest in people like Fairport Convention. So it wasn't necessarily something that we were listening to particularly, but you'd go around people's houses and smoke hash and whatever, and it would be quite likely you'd hear something like that every now and again.
So when you started recording originals, how much detail or how much emphasis did you put on making sure what you were playing was what would fit with that kind of music? Or was it just from the start, no, this is the Pogues, this is our own stamp on this?
Oh, it was always our own stamp on it. We never tried to be, we wouldn't have been able to sort of play it, for want of a better word, to play it properly. We just simply weren't, we wouldn't, none of us would have been skilled enough, but that wasn't what we were about anyway. It was about taking the songs as we felt them.
Was there any nervousness going over to Ireland to play, as far as them saying, what the hell are you Brits doing playing Irish music?
There was, I think I can fairly say here, I don't really like speaking for him most of the time, but I think Shane felt a little bit nervous about it. I was, from my own personal point of view, it was all sort of like a bit of bravado, you know what I mean? I just, there was a lot of people in the Irish folk music scene who weren't particularly enamored of us, but at the same time, there were a lot who were. I kind of understood what we were doing. I could see what we were doing with the sort of Irish music that we were playing, and the sort of songs that Shane was writing. And so I actually felt confident enough in them not to be too worried about what other people might be saying about how, in any kind of a sort of how dare you do this, who do you think you are kind of thing. Though at the same time, having said that, I was, with regard to, say, playing the tin whistle, I was aware that, okay, I'm not going to play this the way that that it should be played, because I can't.
Did you ever take any lessons in anything?
No.
Not hitting your head with a beer tray?
I didn't. I didn't. I found out how to do that all on my own.
You could teach that, though. You can teach a master's course.
I don't think it's no one could be taught that. You either have it or you haven't.
When did that first come about?
Again, that was Shane's idea.
Okay.
He assured me that it was a traditional device.
Yeah.
I think he had mule train in mind. I don't know how traditional mule train actually is, or if it is, which tradition it belongs to. Yeah.
Okay, so the band starts in the early '80s, and at what point did you start to realize that this was something you'd be doing for a job?
It all sort of it all kind of unfolded. We always got great reviews in the papers. Shane just started writing these fantastic songs. It was weird. It just opened out in front of us. So I kind of became aware pretty early on that this is something that could actually go quite a long way.
Right. Well, I guess as far as the band goes, when did you finally there must have been a moment where he brought a song to the band, or you had a rehearsal and you just stopped and said, holy shit, this is... Wow.
Oh, that was happening all the time internally. Yeah. I mean, right from I think Boys from the County Hell. I mean, Streams of Whiskey was the first song we ever played on stage. If it wasn't Streams of Whiskey, then it was Dark Streets of London. I think it was actually Streams of Whiskey was the first song we ever rehearsed. When you sort of start from that, I remember I think at the fourth or fifth rehearsal, I think it was, he brought in Boys from the County Hell, and I was just thinking, what the fuck is this? I missed a couple of days rehearsal when they did Sick Bed of Kilcullen, and I heard it back Someone, Jem or James, I think it was, gave me a cassette and said, "Here, you better have a listen to this because this is a song we did the other day." Took it home, put on Sickbed, this very formative version of Sickbed, and it was just astonishing.
When you met him at the Ramones gig, were you familiar with his bands before that?
In April '77, the Nips would have, if the Nips had existed at that point, they would have only just started. It was something I became aware of later on. I met Shane then in '77 at the Ramones show. I didn't meet him again until about 2 years later in Burton Street, which was a street full of squats, where everybody was squatting. That's kind of where the band sort of really formed, in the Bloomsbury area of London.
Right.
And by that point, the Nips were pretty well established on the London gig circuit.
And so then that group breaks up, the Pogues start, you do the first album, and at that point, everybody's on board fully.
Yes, except for Philip and Terry came later, but everyone else is on board.
Right. And so then Rum Sodomy and the Lash, and was that a difficult transition to work with a producer?
No, I honestly can't say that it was. I couldn't really say that it was any different from the first one. I mean, we had, the first one did have a producer. It was a guy called Stan Brennan, who was the Nips manager, who actually sadly died last year.
Oh,
yeah. He was, and I think he got a really good sound on the album. Considering that he wasn't really a producer, he was doing the producer's job because somebody had to do it. I think he did a very good job.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I was asking about the producer, because I know, Elvis Costello he produced Rum Sodomy and the Lash probably more than the first one was produced, right?
I guess that is, yes, yeah, he unquestionably did, and I don't know that it's. I used to sort of not really be too fussed about producers, but I realised that was possibly somewhat a Luddite point of view, that there's not necessarily anything wrong with Luddites either. There are clearly some producers who make a really significant difference and have a very positive contribution to make. I think sometimes, I think there was a thing particularly back then as well of you got to have, I'm not saying here about Elvis Costello obviously, but you got to have this guy this person there are the sort of flavour of the month, the moment they did this record and they did that record. And I don't know if it was always if people always chose these big name producers generally it seems to be the record labels that were interested in them, and I don't know if people always get served well, if the artists always get served well in those circumstances.
So then, correct me if I'm wrong, then Cait and Elvis start their relationship, and then she leaves the band.
She left the band. Let me see now. She was around for Straight to Hell, which was 86. Yeah, I think the end of 86 she left.
Right. And was that how did that affect the band?
It's we got Daryl, and Daryl was already with us, and Daryl was a really good bass player. I've got to say that Cot had a certain there was a certain sort of edge to the band when she was in it that I think we never possibly quite recovered. I think there was a sort of a vibrancy and an urgency about her that,
Yeah, and now you're playing with her again, 40 years later almost.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How did that come about that you're playing together again?
We were both doing Shane's 60th birthday thing in Dublin, which was 2 years ago now, 3 years ago now. Shane was born on Christmas Day 57, is a year older than me, yeah. So that would have been January 2017. We were doing that, and I'd already started Poguetry with the Lost Bayou Ramblers back in 2015, and it just seemed a no-brainer. Right.
And do you feel that energy, that vibrancy is back?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I think it's actually made it was always fun with us, me and the Ramblers, but I honestly think she's brought it up to another level.
Tell me a little bit about, I know it's not the most pleasant time to talk about, but when things did start to go south, I guess when was the first time you knew that there was a big if with Shane?
Well, I think it became apparent over the course of probably between when Fall from Grace was released, we did something I think we did 285 shows, in a calendar year. So that would be between 87 and 88. And I think it was just I think he just really got sick of it. He got sick of touring, and he just kind of like he sort of let his unhappiness be known. You know what I mean? And it got to the point where we just had to sort of. I mean, on reflection, we made the wrong decision. It probably would have been wiser just to sort of like say, all right, look, let's just take a year off. But, you never really, you tend not to make the right decision when, I mean, everybody was fried, and we'd had like 3 years of frying at that point, of this particular type of frying. It was clearly something that he didn't want to do. And so we said, if you don't want to do it, probably better if you leave. Whereas I think we should have, as I say, probably said, yeah, we'll just take it easy for a year. But, I guess we felt, we've got, these commitments and blah, 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 So, yeah, not the right decision.
What was it, the type of situation where everybody was engaging in the same behavior, but he just got more out of control, or?
No, not really. I mean, like there was a couple of people who were, possibly a few people who were like burning the candle at both ends, but it was, it wasn't everybody, and it was that there was enough people around to sort of see what was going wrong and why it was going wrong. But it wasn't a band-wide pattern of self-destructive behavior. No.
Oh, okay. So part of this podcast is to give advice for younger musicians, and I guess what advice do you have for musicians who are working with somebody who's a key member who starts to either prove unreliable or starts to be self-destructive?
I mean, find out what's ailing them, and try to help them. I mean, I can't really put it any, it's like it's just the same as anybody in that situation. It's not a question of whether you're in a band or it could just be just one of your friends. It's when like maybe sometimes when like I don't want to sort of like get melodramatic about it, but like when life just gets a bit too much sometimes, and people sort of like finding it just a bit too much to handle, and so they retreat into sort of possibly self-destructive patterns of behavior because I don't know, it feels it allows them some escape from the other stuff that's kind of like that's they find destructive. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I did want to touch upon just briefly about the time after Shane left, and then you guys continued on for a while. I guess what was the feeling in the band at that point?
I think it would have been very different if we hadn't had Joe Strummer to call on. I think the fact that we did have like Joe Strummer of all people to sort of like ready to sort of not ready to step in, because we hadn't it wasn't like we didn't have him lined up as a replacement or anything like that. But we had access to him, and I think there was a few days of like, or maybe a couple of weeks of like, all right, well, what the fuck do we do now? And then, if my memory serves me right, it would have been Frank Murray, the band's manager, who's also sadly died. He suggested Joe, or he spoke to Joe, and Joe was really up for it. And so that really just gave us a huge sort of lease of life. It was a real shot in the arm. We'd had Joe standing in for Philip on on 2 tours, on a North American tour and on a European tour. It had been fantastic. So to have him there to take over from Shane, just to step into Shane's shoes, even though it was it was actually the best part of a year. That really enabled us to keep going.
Yeah, and then you continued on with
me.
You taking over the lead vocals. And how do you look upon that time?
With regret? No. no, not at all, actually. I mean, like it was what it was. I'm not like the biggest fan of those last 2 Pogues albums without Shane, but at the same time, there's a couple of songs on those that I really like.
Well, that's another like crucial thing, is like the kind of advice for people. I mean, how do you know when to stop? Does it require having somebody who's a manager who's has that sort of perspective, who will just shoot you straight, or what if your manager did say, I don't know about this, guys?
I sort of wish we'd actually had somebody around who could have said to us, no, this isn't the right thing to do right at this moment. To answer your question, I think because you feel that there's everything's dried up. And it comes to the point where the risk that you run, certainly with when it comes to being in a band or whatever, with not walking away at the right time, is that you'll walk out one night and no one's going to be there.
So now I wonder, I'd read that you'd been working on a Pogues musical, and is this all in there?
Oh, no, it's not about the band. The musical isn't about the band at all. No.
Okay, so it's more like kind of like the Mamma Mia thing where the songs of the Pogues are in it, but then not Jersey Boys, more Mamma Mia.
More Mamma Mia, certainly, yeah, though it's not really like Mamma Mia either.
Right.
But, yeah, it's more like that, yeah. Using the songs to illustrate the story, if you like, to expand on the story, yeah.
So what's going on with that?
As far as I know, more rewrites, more workshops. It's a very, very long and drawn-out process.
When did you start working on it?
Or at least 10 years ago.
Okay.
There are so many drafts. It's not being workshopped at the moment. It was workshopped back in December. And we're looking at arranging another workshop soon. But I really don't know any more than that.
Yeah. What's the working title?
A Fairytale in New York.
Oh, that's great. And so what did you do between that and the reunion? There was a band called the Vendettas, right?
There was, yeah. The Vendettas were really good. But it was just so tough trying to put a band together and hold it together. When I was I was coming up to, I was like 40 years old. And I felt, oh no, this is ancient. 40 is far too old to be, thinking about starting a band.
Right.
Right. And it was just like, because it is kind of hard. You forget after sort of like having been in the, I'm talking about, say, 97, 98. So that's, the Pogues split up in 96. So it's like 14 years in the Pogues. And as I say, the Pogues was always so easy. It just got easier and easier and easier until it started getting shit, and then it stopped.
Then the Pogues reform, and I'm imagining that was some sort of, I guess, tell me what your take is on the whole thing.
The Pogues reunion was preceded by a real fucking genuine tragedy, which was Kirsty's horrible death. That was a really, really dark time. I actually got the phone call about the Pogues reunion, I think, not long after Kirsty had died. That was all a bit weird, that first reunion, because it was great and the gigs were brilliant and everything, and it was overshadowed by this absence. And I think I'm not sure that we properly sort of appreciated it at that actual time. I think it's something that possibly became a little bit evident with hindsight. We did some more shows the following summer, a couple of festivals, but we didn't do anything again until 2004, and then in 2004 it kicked off again with we did Christmas shows and then just kept going. I wanted to get that thing in about Kirsty because we hadn't mentioned her, and it did occur to me just how much of a shadow that cast on that first reunion.
Yeah, when you hear that song now, it must be bittersweet.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, it's amazing that. Do you? I don't know how often you look at like numbers on Spotify or anything, but it's just amazing how many streams that song in particular has.
We become, I think, during that Christmas period, we become something like, what is it, the 300th biggest band in the world?
That's great.
But on Spotify, I mean, like,
right,
yeah.
So when you saw the Ramblers and knew you could connect with them, was that kind of, I mean, you'd been a number of years without being in a proper band. Was that difficult for finding an identity, or I guess what did you do in those years that you weren't?
Well, I mean, I saw the Ramblers, and the first time I saw the Ramblers was in 2011. The Pogues reunion was still in full flow. We were in New Orleans, but we were still touring the States. I think we did 2 American tours that year. I can't quite remember actually. So yeah, I was right in the middle of all that. But just seeing the Ramblers, that was just an immediate sort of like, oh wow. I thought they were absolutely great, and I thought that they could that they would be absolutely perfect for doing Pogue songs. Should I ever want to do such a thing, which I pretty much decided that I did indeed want to do exactly that. About hard on the heels of the first thought, actually, very hard on the heels of the first thought. Though it took me 4 years to actually do anything about it, and And even then, it was only through a slip of the tongue on someone else's part, or a misapprehension on someone else's part, that really enabled the whole thing to get off the ground. Because somebody was talking to a mutual friend, this guy Davis Rogan in New Orleans, was talking to Louis Michaud from the Lost Bayou Ramblers, and he said, "Oh, so when are you going to be doing this thing with Spyder then?" And Louis said, "Who's Spyder?" And they had absolutely no idea. And Louis, to his eternal credit, had very little idea about who the Pogues were either. I think he was only familiar with the name of the Pogues because people compared the Lost Bayou Ramblers to the Pogues in in interviews and stuff, or reviews. People I mean, it's kind of possibly lazy journalism, but I kind of get it. It's as a shorthand, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the spirit's there.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So it's slightly disingenuous of me to sort of like poo-poo the sort of connection altogether, especially when I've made the very same, the whole thing wouldn't be happening if I hadn't made the same connection myself when I saw them. The whole Poguetry thing, I mean. That's
great.
Yeah.
And it's great too, because I mean, it feels like that's kind of the type of, spirit that you were evoking at the height of the Pogues' career, when you expanded the band and there were horns and everything. And
absolutely, I really want to get to that thing where we have that really big sort of late period Pogues sound. The sort of sound that we actually achieved. Peace and Love, I think, is a slightly underrated album in a lot of ways. I really like the overall sound of it. I think there's a couple of songs in it that possibly shouldn't be on it, and maybe a couple that needed to be finished properly before they were put on it. But I think the way that the actual album sounds is great, and there's a couple of songs on that I really, really love.
What is the song that you find yourself going back to the most, that you had a part in, that you feel kind of is a part of who you are more than anything else?
The Broad Majestic Shannon.
What about
That's my favourite Pogue song.
Yeah.
It's one that we don't do actually in Poguetry.
How come?
It's quite hard.
Yeah.
It's a really, really difficult song to sing.
Did you ever think you'd be doing this into your 60s? No,
I didn't. But here we are.
Yeah.
What can you do?
But here we are. And if you happen to be near any of the places where Poguetry is playing, get thee to there. The tour is mostly along the East Coast, with a lot of stops at city wineries. But check out wherever you go for your concert listings for the full details. So at the top of the show, I told you about how you can receive a $100 discount on a Berklee Online course. Head over to musicismylifepod.com right now to redeem this special offer, and you'll also get a link for all sorts of free resources. Also, check out berkleeonsite.com. The dates for Berklee Online's annual music conference have been announced. It's taking place May 29th and 30th in Boston, Massachusetts. And registration is open with a limited time early bird discount. Anyway, this episode was edited by Talia Smith, mastered by Gabriel Reifer-Cohen. All visual assets coordinated by Mike DeBenedictis. Social media by Brooke Larson. Web assistance courtesy of Mark Thomas, Steve Zimmerman, Joe McDonough, and Chris Keene. I wrote and recorded the Music Is My Life theme song, but the expert remixing comes courtesy of Lily Dickinson. Special thanks to Howard Wolfling, and thanks to you for listening. Take note to join us on Monday, March 16th for special guest Ron Pope, who has a brand new album coming out this Friday on March 6th. We'll talk soon.